listen to me. Listen carefully. There is a mystery in the way God works with those He has chosen. Many people think that being chosen means being surrounded by crowds, applause, constant support, and visible success. But the truth is deeper than that. The truth is often painful to the natural mind. The truth is that those chosen by God often walk alone. Not because they are rejected by God, but because they are being prepared by Him. When God places His hand upon a life, He does not follow human patterns. He does not build according to human expectations. He separates before He elevates. He removes before He reveals. He distances before He displays. And this is why many chosen ones find themselves misunderstood, isolated, and sometimes even rejected by those closest to them. It is not punishment. It is process. Look at the pattern of divine selection. God does not call crowds. He calls individuals. When He wants to change a generation, He starts with one person. That person must first be separated from noise, from familiar voices, from comfortable relationships, and from the approval of people. Because as long as you are controlled by the voices around you, you cannot fully hear the voice of God within you. Many people want the glory without the loneliness. They want the calling without the separation. They want the anointing without the process. But God does not work like that. When He wants to entrust someone with a great assignment, He first takes them through a season where they feel alone, misunderstood, and sometimes forgotten. In that season, God is not absent. He is closest. Sometimes you look around and ask, why am I not like others? Why do I feel different? Why do I not fit in? Why do relationships break around me? Why do people leave when I need them most? You think something is wrong with you. But what if nothing is wrong? What if God is simply rearranging your environment so that His purpose can stand clearly in your life? When God chooses someone, He often removes familiar supports so that the person learns to depend on Him alone. Because if your strength comes from people, your purpose will be limited by people. But if your strength comes from God, your purpose will be unlimited. There are seasons when God deliberately allows silence around you. People who once understood you suddenly misunderstand you. People who once stood with you suddenly walk away. Doors that once opened easily suddenly close. You pray and it seems like heaven is quiet. You try to explain yourself, but no one seems to understand. In that moment, you feel alone. But that is often the moment God is shaping something deep within you. God knows that before He can use someone publicly, He must build them privately. Before He can trust someone with influence, He must first test them with isolation. Before He can reveal them to the world, He must hide them from the world. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is emptiness. Aloneness is preparation. Loneliness is when you feel abandoned without purpose. Aloneness is when God withdraws distractions so that He can speak clearly. Many chosen ones mistake divine preparation for divine rejection. They think God has left them, when in reality God has drawn them closer. When God wants to refine gold, He places it in fire. When He wants to refine a soul, He places it in solitude. In solitude, your true nature is revealed. In solitude, your motives are exposed. In solitude, your faith is tested. When there is no crowd to applaud you, no friends to comfort you, no human voice to encourage you, what remains inside you? That is what God is interested in. Some people only know how to serve God when they are surrounded by people. Some people only pray when others are watching. Some people only stay faithful when they feel appreciated. But the chosen ones are those who remain faithful even when no one sees, no one understands, and no one applauds. God separates chosen ones because He knows that not everyone can go with them where He is taking them. Some relationships are not evil, but they are not aligned with your destiny. Some friendships are not sinful, but they are not suitable for your calling. Some environments are not dangerous, but they are not designed for your future. If God allowed everyone to remain in your life, your destiny would be diluted. You wonder why certain people drift away without explanation. You wonder why conversations change. You wonder why closeness turns into distance. You wonder why loyalty becomes silence. You try to hold on, but the harder you try, the more they slip away. Sometimes God is the one loosening your grip, because He knows that if they stay, you may never rise. Chosen ones often walk alone because their journey is not ordinary. Ordinary people cannot understand extraordinary calling. Ordinary minds cannot interpret divine vision. Ordinary hearts cannot endure the weight of divine assignment. So God allows chosen ones to walk alone, not to destroy them, but to strengthen them. There is a heavy price attached to divine calling. Many people admire the outcome, but they do not see the process. They see the confidence, but they do not see the tears. They see the wisdom, but they do not see the confusion that preceded it. They see the authority, but they do not see the seasons of silence that produced it. When you are chosen, your path will not always be crowded. Sometimes the path will be narrow and quiet. Sometimes the path will be dark and uncertain. Sometimes the path will be painful and misunderstood. But in that path, God is teaching you to hear His voice above all other voices. If everyone understands you, if everyone agrees with you, if everyone supports you, if everyone stays with you, it may be a sign that you are not walking a divine path, but a popular path. Divine paths are often lonely because they are unique. God often hides chosen ones before He reveals them. He takes them away from the spotlight and places them in the shadow. Not because He wants to shame them, but because He wants to shape them. In the hidden place, God works on your character, not just your gifts. In the hidden place, God deals with your pride, your fear, your impatience, your insecurity. In the hidden place, God teaches you humility, obedience, endurance, and trust. Many people want God to use them, but they do not want God to change them. They want power, but they do not want purification. They want influence, but they do not want isolation. They want miracles, but they do not want maturity. But God knows that without inner transformation, outer manifestation will destroy you. Sometimes God allows chosen ones to walk alone so that they do not become addicted to human approval. Because if you depend on applause, you will compromise truth. If you depend on popularity, you will abandon purpose. If you depend on people's opinions, you will lose God's direction. When you walk alone with God, you learn to value His presence above people's presence. You learn to listen to His voice above human voices. You learn to obey Him even when it costs you relationships. You learn to stand firm even when everyone walks away. There are moments when chosen ones feel like strangers even in familiar places. They sit among people, but their hearts feel distant. They laugh with others, but inside they feel different. They try to explain their vision, but words fail them. They share their dreams, but people look at them with doubt. They speak about their convictions, but others call them extreme. In those moments, chosen ones begin to understand that they are not meant to blend in. They are meant to stand out. They are not meant to follow crowds. They are meant to lead paths. They are not meant to depend on consensus. They are meant to depend on calling. Walking alone is not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it is a sign of strength. Sometimes it is a sign that God is protecting you from wrong associations. Sometimes it is a sign that God is protecting your destiny from premature exposure. Sometimes it is a sign that God is protecting your heart from distractions that would derail your purpose. There are secrets God only shares with those who are willing to walk with Him alone. There are depths of wisdom God only reveals to those who are willing to endure silence. There are levels of authority God only grants to those who are willing to lose popularity. When chosen ones walk alone, they begin to see life differently. They begin to understand that not everyone who smiles with you is meant to walk with you. They begin to understand that not every door that opens is meant to be entered. They begin to understand that not every voice that speaks into their life is meant to be followed. Walking alone teaches discernment. It teaches patience. It teaches resilience. It teaches dependence on God rather than dependence on people. There are times when chosen ones try to force connection with people who are not meant to stay. They lower their standards to fit in. They silence their convictions to avoid conflict. They hide their calling to maintain relationships. But the more they try to fit in, the more uncomfortable they feel. Because deep inside, their spirit knows that they are not meant to live an ordinary life. God sometimes allows chosen ones to be misunderstood so that they do not become proud. When people misunderstand you, you learn humility. When people misjudge you, you learn patience. When people criticize you, you learn self-control. When people leave you, you learn independence from human validation. There is a hidden reason behind the loneliness of chosen ones. God knows that if He does not separate you from certain people, those people may later become obstacles to your calling. God knows that if He does not remove certain voices from your life, those voices may later confuse your direction. God knows that if He does not isolate you for a season, you may never fully discover your identity. Sometimes the pain of separation is greater than the joy of connection. But God sees beyond the present pain. He sees the future purpose. He sees the impact your life will have. He sees the lives you will touch. He sees the change you will bring. And because of that, He is willing to allow you to go through seasons that others may never understand. Chosen ones often feel like they are walking through life without a map. Others seem to have clear paths, stable relationships, predictable journeys. But chosen ones often walk through uncertainty. They move by faith, not by sight. They make decisions that others cannot understand. They follow directions that others cannot see. When God leads you, He does not always explain Himself. He does not always give you full details. He does not always make things comfortable. Sometimes He simply says, move, and you move. Sometimes He says, wait, and you wait. Sometimes He says, leave, and you leave. And in those moments, you feel alone because no one else understands why you are doing what you are doing. But obedience often looks like loneliness before it looks like success. Many chosen ones go through seasons where they feel abandoned by people they trusted. They feel betrayed by friends they loved. They feel rejected by communities they served. In those moments, they question themselves. They question their calling. They question their worth. But God is not questioning them. God is refining them. God sometimes allows chosen ones to lose relationships so that they can gain revelation. He allows them to lose comfort so that they can gain courage. He allows them to lose support so that they can gain spiritual strength. Walking alone with God is not easy, but it is powerful. When you walk alone, you learn to hear God's whisper in the silence. When you walk alone, you learn to recognize His guidance in subtle ways. When you walk alone, you learn to trust His timing even when it seems slow. Chosen ones are often misunderstood because their values are different. They are not driven by what drives others. They are not excited by what excites others. They are not satisfied with what satisfies others. They are not afraid of what frightens others. They see beyond the surface. They think beyond the present. They feel beyond the ordinary. Because of this, they often feel out of place. They often feel disconnected. They often feel alone. But that feeling is not a curse. It is a sign that they are not designed for ordinary environments. Sometimes God isolates chosen ones so that He can reveal their true identity to them. When everyone is around you, you can hide behind roles, expectations, and labels. But when you are alone, you confront yourself. You confront your fears. You confront your doubts. You confront your desires. And in that confrontation, God begins to reshape you. Walking alone strips you of false identities. It removes masks. It exposes motivations. It reveals whether you truly love God or just love recognition. It reveals whether you truly believe in your calling or just enjoy attention. Many people want to be chosen, but they do not want the consequences of being chosen. They want the crown, but they do not want the cross. They want the testimony, but they do not want the trial. They want the victory, but they do not want the battle. Chosen ones walk alone because their journey is not designed for crowds. Their path is not designed for approval. Their calling is not designed for comfort. But listen carefully. Walking alone does not mean walking without God. In fact, it often means walking closer to God than ever before. When people leave, God stays. When voices fade, God speaks. When support disappears, God strengthens. When doors close, God opens new ones. Sometimes God allows chosen ones to feel alone so that they can discover that His presence is enough. When you realize that God is enough, you stop begging people to stay. You stop forcing relationships. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing rejection. You begin to understand that if God is with you, you are never truly alone. Chosen ones often go through seasons where they feel invisible. They work hard, but no one notices. They sacrifice, but no one appreciates. They remain faithful, but no one acknowledges. They serve, but no one applauds. In those seasons, God is teaching them to serve without seeking recognition. Because if your motivation is applause, you will abandon your assignment when applause disappears. But if your motivation is obedience, you will remain faithful even in silence. There is a hidden beauty in walking alone with God. In that solitude, your relationship with Him becomes deeper. Your faith becomes stronger. Your vision becomes clearer. Your purpose becomes more defined. Walking alone teaches you to rely on inner conviction rather than external validation. It teaches you to move by divine direction rather than human opinion. It teaches you to stand firm even when you stand alone. Sometimes chosen ones feel tired of walking alone. They wonder how long the journey will last. They wonder when people will understand them. They wonder when companionship will return. They wonder when the silence will break. But God's timing is not human timing. God does not rush His process. He does not reveal prematurely. He does not release before preparation is complete. If God allowed everyone to walk with you before you are ready, you might be destroyed by the weight of expectations. If God revealed you too early, you might be crushed by criticism. If God surrounded you with crowds too soon, you might lose your identity. So God hides you. He isolates you. He allows you to walk alone. Not because He hates you, but because He trusts you with a future that requires strength. One day, chosen ones look back and realize that their lonely seasons were not wasted seasons. They were building seasons. They were training seasons. They were shaping seasons. They were seasons where God was quietly constructing something powerful inside them. When chosen ones finally step into the fullness of their calling, people see only the glory, not the story. They see only the outcome, not the process. They see only the confidence, not the confusion. They see only the authority, not the loneliness that produced it. But chosen ones know the truth. They know that without those lonely nights, they would not have that strong faith. Without those silent seasons, they would not have that clear vision. Without those painful separations, they would not have that deep wisdom. Walking alone is not the end of the story. It is the middle of the story. It is the hidden chapter that prepares the visible chapter. It is the silent training before the public assignment. If you feel like you are walking alone, do not assume that God has abandoned you. Ask yourself whether God is preparing you. If you feel misunderstood, do not assume that your life is meaningless. Ask yourself whether God is refining your identity. If you feel separated, do not assume that your journey is cursed. Ask yourself whether God is protecting your destiny. Chosen ones walk alone, not because they are rejected by God, but because they are trusted by God. Not because they are forgotten by heaven, but because they are being shaped for heaven's purpose. Not because they are weak, but because they are being strengthened. There is a hidden reason behind your isolation. There is a divine intention behind your separation. There is a heavenly design behind your loneliness. And one day, when the time is right, God will bring the right people into your life. Not people who will distract you from your calling, but people who will align with your purpose. Not people who will drain your vision, but people who will support your mission. Not people who will compete with your destiny, but people who will complement it. Until that day, walk with God, trust His process, embrace the solitude, learn from the silence, grow in the hidden place. Because the same God who allows you to walk alone today is the God who will reveal you tomorrow in ways you never imagined. Listen carefully. There is a path that many desire, but few are willing to walk. There is a journey that attracts the heart, but frightens the flesh. It is the path of walking alone so that you can truly walk with God. Many people want to walk with God while holding tightly to everyone and everything around them. But God does not always share His deepest secrets in the presence of crowds. There are moments when He calls a soul away from noise, away from familiarity, away from comfort, not to punish, but to reveal something greater than human companionship. When God wants to draw a person close, He often begins by creating distance between that person and their usual surroundings. Not because relationships are evil, not because people are wrong, but because the human heart is easily distracted. As long as voices are loud around you, it is difficult to hear the still voice within you. As long as you are surrounded by opinions, expectations, and pressures, it is difficult to discern divine direction. So God gently, sometimes painfully, removes you from the crowd so that He can speak to you without interruption. Walking alone is not something the flesh enjoys. The flesh craves company, approval, affirmation, and recognition. The flesh wants to be understood, celebrated, and embraced. But the Spirit understands that there are levels of intimacy with God that cannot be reached in the presence of constant noise. There are depths of revelation that cannot be accessed when the mind is occupied with pleasing people. There are heights of purpose that cannot be climbed while carrying the weight of unnecessary attachments. Many people wonder why their journey feels lonely. They ask why they feel different, why they no longer fit into places that once felt familiar, why conversations that once excited them now feel empty, why relationships that once felt strong now feel distant. They try to force themselves back into old patterns, old circles, old habits, but their spirit resists. They feel torn between belonging and obedience, between comfort and calling, between people and purpose. And in that tension, God is quietly teaching them what it means to walk alone so that they can walk with Him. To walk with God is not merely to believe in Him. It is to align your heart with His heart, your will with His will, your desires with His desires. It is to be willing to lose what is familiar in order to gain what is eternal. It is to be willing to disappoint people in order not to disobey God. It is to be willing to stand alone if standing with others means compromising truth. There are moments when God deliberately allows misunderstanding to surround you. People who once praised you begin to question you. People who once supported you begin to doubt you. People who once celebrated you begin to criticize you. You try to explain yourself, but words fail. You try to defend your intentions, but your explanations are ignored. In those moments, God is teaching you a painful but powerful lesson. Not everyone needs to understand you for you to be right with Him. Walking alone means accepting that your journey may not make sense to everyone. It means accepting that your obedience may look like rebellion to some, that your silence may look like pride, that your separation may look like rejection, that your discipline may look like arrogance. But when your heart is anchored in God, you learn not to measure your life by human interpretation, but by divine instruction. There is a hidden strength that is born in solitude. When you have no one to lean on but God, you discover how strong His presence truly is. When you have no one to comfort you but God, you discover how deep His comfort can be. When you have no one to guide you but God, you discover how precise His guidance is. When you have no one to applaud you but God, you discover how sufficient His approval is. Many people want God's power but fear God's process. They want divine favor but avoid divine isolation. They want spiritual authority but reject spiritual discipline. They want God to use them but resist the loneliness that often precedes usefulness. But God knows that without solitude, pride will grow unchecked. Without silence, the soul will remain shallow. Without separation, purpose will remain unclear. When you walk alone, you begin to see yourself without the filters of people's expectations. You begin to confront your true motives, your hidden fears, your unspoken desires. You begin to realize how much of your life has been shaped by the need to be accepted rather than the desire to be obedient. And in that realization, God begins to reshape you from the inside. Walking alone strips away illusions. It removes the masks you wear to please others. It exposes the compromises you make to avoid conflict. It reveals the areas where your faith depends more on people than on God. And although this process is uncomfortable, it is necessary, because God cannot fully trust someone who is still controlled by human approval. There are seasons when God intentionally closes doors that you did not expect to close. Opportunities disappear. Invitations stop coming. Connections fade. Plans collapse. You feel abandoned, confused, and sometimes angry. You wonder why God would allow such losses in your life. But often, those closed doors are God's way of redirecting your steps. Sometimes God must remove certain people and paths so that you can discover the path He designed specifically for you. Walking alone teaches you patience. When there is no crowd to rush you, you learn to wait on God's timing. When there is no external pressure, you learn to move according to inner conviction. When there is no immediate reward, you learn to serve without expectation. And in that patience, your faith becomes deeper and more stable. Walking alone teaches you courage. When you stand without support, you learn to stand without fear. When you speak without agreement, you learn to speak without hesitation. When you move without confirmation from others, you learn to move with boldness. And in that courage, your spirit becomes unshakable. Walking alone teaches you discernment. When you are no longer surrounded by many voices, you begin to distinguish between God's voice and your own emotions. You begin to recognize the difference between divine leading and human desire. You begin to understand that not every good opportunity is a God opportunity, and not every open door is a divine door. There are times when walking alone feels unbearable. Nights feel longer. Questions feel heavier. Silence feels louder. You pray and feel no immediate answer. You cry and feel no visible response. You seek God and feel as if He is distant. But often, in those moments, God is closer than ever. He is teaching you to trust Him beyond feelings, beyond signs, beyond evidence. Walking with God is not always emotional. Sometimes it is dry. Sometimes it is confusing. Sometimes it is painful. Sometimes it is quiet. But it is in those quiet moments that the deepest transformation occurs. Because when God removes external distractions, He begins to speak to the deepest parts of your soul. Many people think that walking with God means constant joy, constant miracles, constant victory. But often, walking with God means constant surrender. It means surrendering your plans when God changes direction. It means surrendering your relationships when God calls you to separation. It means surrendering your reputation when God calls you to obedience. Walking alone to walk with God means accepting that your journey will not always be understood. It means accepting that your obedience will sometimes cost you friendships. It means accepting that your calling will sometimes isolate you from familiar environments. But it also means accepting that the intimacy you gain with God will be greater than the comfort you lose with people. There is a strange peace that comes when you finally stop trying to be understood by everyone. There is a quiet strength that emerges when you finally accept that not everyone is meant to walk with you. There is a deep joy that arises when you realize that walking with God is worth every sacrifice. When you walk alone, you begin to understand that God's presence is not a substitute for human companionship, but a higher form of connection. You begin to realize that while people may leave, God remains. While people may change, God is constant. While people may misunderstand, God knows your heart. Walking alone also reveals the fragility of human relationships. You realize how quickly people can change, how easily loyalty can fade, how unpredictable affection can be. And in that realization, you learn not to build your identity on people's opinions, but on God's purpose. Many chosen ones are forced into solitude not because they are antisocial, but because their spirit cannot thrive in shallow environments. They feel suffocated in conversations that lack depth. They feel drained in relationships that lack purpose. They feel restless in environments that lack vision. And gradually, they withdraw not out of pride, but out of necessity. Their soul longs for something deeper, something eternal, something divine. Walking alone is often the price of spiritual depth. If you want to go deeper with God, you cannot always remain in shallow waters. If you want to hear God clearly, you cannot always stay in noisy places. If you want to grow spiritually, you cannot always surround yourself with people who are comfortable with stagnation. There are moments when God intentionally allows you to feel abandoned so that you can discover that He is enough. When people leave, you learn to cling to God. When support disappears, you learn to rely on God. When comfort fades, you learn to find rest in God. Walking alone also teaches you gratitude. You begin to appreciate small moments of divine guidance. You begin to value quiet conversations with God. You begin to treasure inner peace more than external applause. You begin to see that the greatest reward is not popularity, but intimacy with God. Sometimes walking alone feels like dying to your old self. Old habits fall away. Old desires lose their attraction. Old dreams lose their relevance. And although this process feels like loss, it is actually transformation. God is replacing temporary passions with eternal purpose. Walking alone means that you are no longer controlled by the need to be liked. It means that you are willing to obey God, even if obedience makes you unpopular. It means that you are willing to stand for truth, even if standing for truth makes you isolated. It means that you are willing to follow God, even if following Him means walking a path no one else is willing to walk. There is a hidden reward for those who walk alone with God. They develop a sensitivity to His presence that others do not have. They develop a spiritual resilience that others do not understand. They develop a clarity of purpose that others cannot imitate. When you walk alone, you realize that many people walk with you only when the path is easy. But God walks with you even when the path is dark. Many people celebrate you when you succeed, but God strengthens you when you struggle. Many people applaud you when you are visible, but God shapes you when you are hidden. Walking alone with God also changes your definition of success. Success is no longer measured by crowds, applause, or recognition. It is measured by obedience, faithfulness, and alignment with God's will. You begin to understand that being right with God is more important than being liked by people. Sometimes walking alone feels unfair. You see others surrounded by friends, supported by networks, celebrated by communities. You wonder why your journey is different. You wonder why your path seems harder. You wonder why your life feels heavier. But God does not measure destiny by comfort. He measures it by purpose. Those who are called to carry greater responsibility often go through deeper isolation. Those who are called to influence many often walk alone with God before they walk with people. Those who are called to lead others often learn first how to follow God in solitude. Walking alone also protects you from premature exposure. If God revealed everything He planned for you too early, you might be destroyed by pressure. If God surrounded you with crowds too soon, you might lose your identity. If God gave you influence before character, you might misuse it. So He hides you. He isolates you. He trains you in silence. There is a divine logic behind your loneliness. There is a divine strategy behind your separation. There is a divine purpose behind your solitude. God is not wasting your lonely seasons. He is using them to build something within you that cannot be built in the presence of constant companionship. Walking alone teaches you to pray differently. Your prayers become less about impressing others and more about connecting with God. Your worship becomes less about performance and more about sincerity. Your faith becomes less about tradition and more about conviction. Walking alone also teaches you to listen. When there are fewer voices around you, you begin to notice subtle movements within your spirit. You begin to sense divine nudges. You begin to understand God's language. And gradually, you realize that God has been speaking all along, but noise prevented you from hearing Him. Many people fear walking alone because they associate it with failure. But in the spiritual realm, walking alone often means advancement. It means that God is taking you to a level where not everyone can follow. It means that God is entrusting you with insights that not everyone can handle. It means that God is shaping you for a role that requires inner strength. Walking alone does not mean rejecting people. It means prioritizing God. It does not mean hating relationships. It means refusing to let relationships replace divine direction. It does not mean isolating yourself out of bitterness. It means accepting solitude out of obedience. There are moments when God will ask you to leave environments that feel safe. He will ask you to step out of comfort zones that feel familiar. He will ask you to walk paths that feel uncertain. And in those moments, you will feel alone because no one else sees what you see. But obedience often feels lonely before it feels rewarding. Walking alone also teaches you compassion. When you experience misunderstanding, you become more understanding toward others. When you experience rejection, you become more empathetic toward the rejected. When you experience silence, you become more sensitive to those who suffer quietly. When you walk alone with God, you begin to realize that the greatest battles are not external, but internal. The battle between fear and faith. The battle between comfort and calling. The battle between people's expectations and God's instructions. And in that battle, solitude becomes your training ground. Walking alone is not permanent, but it is purposeful. God does not isolate forever. He isolates for preparation. He separates for refinement. He hides for revelation. And when the season of preparation is complete, He brings you back to people with a new level of wisdom, strength, and authority. But until that time, walking alone is your classroom. Silence is your teacher. Solitude is your training. God is your companion. When you finally understand this, you stop fighting solitude. You stop resenting isolation. You stop blaming God for separation. Instead, you begin to embrace the hidden work God is doing within you. You begin to understand that walking alone is not a curse, but a calling. It is not a sign of abandonment, but a sign of selection. It is not evidence of rejection, but evidence of divine focus. Walking alone to walk with God means choosing divine intimacy over human approval. It means choosing obedience over popularity. It means choosing purpose over comfort. It means choosing God even when choosing Him costs you everything. And in that choice, something powerful happens within your spirit. Your faith becomes unbreakable. Your vision becomes unshakable. Your identity becomes rooted in God rather than in people. Walking alone changes the way you see life. You begin to understand that not everyone who walks with you today will walk with you tomorrow. You begin to understand that some people are seasonal, some are transitional, and some are permanent. You begin to understand that God sometimes removes people not because they are bad, but because they have completed their role in your journey. Walking alone also teaches you gratitude for divine companionship. When you realize that God has never left you, even when everyone else did, your heart becomes filled with quiet confidence. You no longer panic when people walk away. You no longer beg for attention. You no longer fear solitude. You understand that walking with God is worth every lonely step, every silent night, every misunderstood moment, every painful separation. And gradually, you realize that the loneliness you once feared has become the place where your spirit grew stronger, your faith grew deeper, your purpose grew clearer, your relationship with God grew more intimate. Walking alone to walk with God means accepting that your journey will not always be crowded, but it will always be guided. It means accepting that your path will not always be understood, but it will always be purposeful. It means accepting that your life will not always be comfortable, but it will always be meaningful. And in that understanding, your heart becomes settled, your spirit becomes steady, your faith becomes firm. You no longer measure your life by how many people walk with you, but by how closely you walk with God. You no longer measure your worth by how many people understand you, but by how deeply you understand God's will. You no longer measure your success by applause, but by obedience. Walking alone is no longer something you fear. It becomes something you accept, something you understand, something you embrace. Because you realize that sometimes the only way to truly walk with God is to be willing to walk alone.